Hey, thanks for tuning in, and welcome to the third and final video in this three-part series about breaking into software engineering. So, the first video that I recorded, I was focusing on how you go about your application process and the things you want to focus on so that you can start to get noticed by recruiters and how you can go through that. The next part was really about interviewing. So, if you think about now that you've done your applications and you're actually getting to sit down and talk with interviewers, what do you need to focus on for that? What do you have to practice? What's the interview process like? What should you look for? And even if you compare these two things, they're very different sets of skills that you want to practice, different things you want to focus on, right? Making your resume stand out. Now that you've done that, okay, how do you stand out in the interview? There's definitely overlap, but I think there's really specific things you want to focus on for that. So, in today's video, in the final video, we're going to assume now you've got your job. Okay, so now you don't have to focus on putting your applications together. You don't have to focus on your interview techniques. And I want to kind of compare and contrast what you did in those first two phases to this final phase. Now that you're in the job. So with that said, I'll jump into the material, and if you could do me a favor and like the video if you enjoy the content and subscribe to the channel, that would be awesome. It lets me know that you're enjoying this content and you want me to make more. So, okay, let's assume that you've now got your job. Awesome work. It's really not an easy process to get to this point, but now that you have it, what are the things you should be focusing on? What should you be doing? So I have a couple recommendations to start, and they're kind of general, but I like to encourage basically everyone to do this if you're new at a company or especially junior and early in your career. So the first thing is that you're going to be spending time doing domain learning. And if you think about software engineering, right? So software engineering is applicable to so many different industries. You could be working in agriculture, you could be working in automotive, you could be working in finance, like so many different things. And that's going to involve domain learning, right? So keep that in mind that when you join a company and you're starting to do work, you're going to be spending time doing that. A lot of companies may have some expectation that you have some of this knowledge beforehand, but many companies will also acknowledge that given that software skills are generally applicable across many different domains, they expect that there is a lot of ramp up time, especially for more junior folks. So, do anticipate that you will be doing this kind of learning on the job, especially a lot in the beginning, just to get ramped up. And with that said, the next part is really ask questions. And it sounds maybe kind of obvious, like, yeah, you're new, you're going to have questions to ask. But I mean it, like, actually ask the questions, right? So I'll explain a couple different aspects to this. So the first part is I think a lot of people that are new are afraid to ask questions. And, I don't blame you. It can be really intimidating. You're the new person. There's people with lots of experience. You don't want to bother them and take time away from them. This is, I think, further compounded if you're working remotely, right? You're like, you can't really gauge if you kind of feel like you're just bothering people by interrupting them if you're shooting them a message, that kind of thing. But, I do really want to encourage you to be asking questions. It's number one, how you're going to learn. And hopefully the place that you're working at has kind of created this safe place for you to be able to ask questions, right? So that the more senior people can dedicate the time to answer stuff for you. Maybe they've paired you up with like a sort of like an onboarding buddy or something like that, right? Where you have someone you can reach out to that's maybe not your manager, maybe it could be your manager as well, that you can kind of go to and ask questions, but hopefully they create a safe place for that. And the second part to asking questions is that, and I think a lot of people, I don't know, like it's an oversight where, yes, asking questions will hopefully get you answers so you can do things. But the other part to it is that when you're a new person, you're actually coming in with different perspective, right? So I'll give you some really simple examples. Maybe one example is you're putting up your first set of pull requests and code reviews, and you're going through the process of that, and you're like, hey, like why is it that these tests take 12 hours to run in our continuous integration process, or I have all of these build warnings, and like maybe that seems concerning to you. Like you have genuine questions about this kind of stuff. I think it's a really good opportunity to kind of surface those different perspectives and be able to ask people about that, right? I've definitely seen situations where, maybe more tenured people can be like, oh, yeah, like, the warnings or something, like, here's the history there, here's kind of why it's at that state. But maybe they're going, but you know what? It's been a while since we talked about situation X where we couldn't resolve the warnings, or we did say that we wanted to kind of start reducing those. Maybe I'll take a note and we should, bring up that conversation again. Or the tests take too long. And, if you're not being vocal about that kind of stuff, maybe the people that have been working there for a while are complacent about it, right? And that's kind of crappy. They're just used to it, but maybe there's an opportunity to improve that. I don't mean go in and ask questions and pick apart stuff just to blame people for why things are a certain way. But I think if you go in being genuine and trying to seek to understand, and you present yourself that way, I think people will be more receptive to trying to help educate you on why things are that way. But it also opens up some doors for people to start thinking about these particular situations and hopefully come up with ways to make them better. Maybe it's things they haven't thought about in a long time, right? Or just a different way of looking at it. You could be the person that ends up kind of helping that. Okay, so those are a couple of really basic things, really general. And I think it would be worth kind of talking through probably what your first set of projects would look like. I think it's pretty typical that new folks, when they're starting up, they're generally assigned some lower risk type of things that you can contribute to. And this is really just so you can do a little bit of exploration in the code base. You're not going to have all of the knowledge of where all of the different parts of the system are and that kind of thing. And you're still maybe trying to feel out how you need to be writing tests and what types of test coverage there are. And so really, if they can scope down the area that you might be impacting, it's kind of setting you up for success. Like if you make a mistake, it's not going to, blow up everything that the company's doing, that kind of thing. So this generally looks like smaller bug fixes, right? Fixing bugs is important. It maybe isn't the most exciting thing, but it's important to do. And if it's scoped down narrow enough, it's something that you can maybe go researching through the code, figure out how some specific areas work, and then actually contribute a fix, which is awesome. And if it's not a bug fix, it is generally a small feature area, right? So it might be about it could be like, adding a new dialogue in a user like facing application. It might be enabling some API feature that's maybe been asked for but hasn't really been a priority, that kind of thing. So you might be delivering that so it can help some people, but if it's not like a mission critical type of thing. And I would say generally these types of things probably don't feel super exciting, but they're meant to be kind of like a stepping stone learning opportunity. And if you do well at them, and maybe you have to do well at a couple of them, generally it will give people the confidence and you the confidence that you can work on a little bit more complex stuff. So the other thing that I wanted to point out about this, if we start to contrast some of the other videos, and you can go watch those if you haven't, where I focus on the first two phases of breaking into software engineering, like a lot of that focused on the more theoretical side of programming, right? Like if you're going to go practice your algorithms and data structure questions and your system design stuff, a lot of that is focused on, I don't know, like these particular scenarios that you can get quizzed on. And I think that there's something to be said about doing that kind of practice work so you can, really nail those first two steps. But when it comes to reality, like I would certainly argue in my software engineering career, I don't sit down on a daily basis and say like, which is the most, perfect data structure to use for this situation. If I think back to this, LEET code question, or oh yes, this is exactly like the microservices system design question where there was this little trick that we had to look for. It it just doesn't really end up flowing that way. I think those are just really contrived examples that you end up practicing. And don't get me wrong, there's there's value in those scenarios. There's value in understanding the data structure, but I would argue that the way that that stuff is presented in the real world when you're at your job is just not that set up for you, right? So, yes, if you pick the wrong data structure that you're using in some algorithm that you're designing, yes, maybe it's not as performant. Certainly, I'm not saying that's not the case, but it's not like you fail the interview. It might go up for code review and someone's like, hey, you should try using this other thing, right? Like you didn't just fail. It might be a recommendation for someone else to go fix it, or perhaps no one notices it because it's not actually that big of an impact in the area that you're contributing to. So it's just a lot less theoretical, a lot less contrived examples, and a lot more what's the current situation we're dealing with, and just a lot more, I don't know, like hands on that way, I would say. So that's just a big difference. And I think that people that hyper focus on, the theoretical practicing of those questions can often struggle a little bit if they don't kind of have some of these other more, what I would call like real world practice. So, with that said, when I talk about like real world practice, the next thing I wanted to kind of, bring up is that you're now working at a business, right? Obviously, so you've been you've been hired somewhere. You're working for a business. Part of a business, and a big part of it, is that there is some type of income for that business, right? There's customers paying for the software, the services that you're helping create. And that means that there isn't infinite time to go solve problems. And that also means that time is part of a constraint that you have to deal with. So, if you reflect back to like trying to practice programming questions, and trying to make your application for your job seem perfect before you submit it, that kind of thing, like there's going to be other business constraints that come up. Time is certainly one of them. There might be many other things that kind of get introduced as you're working on different projects, but there's going to be other constraints that you have to factor in. And that will mean that if you were thinking about designing some microservice architecture from your system design questions, or which algorithm is the most optimal to do something, there's going to be different constraints that you have to try and interpret those now and apply your knowledge. And if you practice those other things, great, maybe that makes it easier for you. But you have to apply your knowledge with these new constraints so that you can keep making progress. The point that I want to drive home here is that there isn't, in many places, there's not an opportunity to basically to sit back and try to create perfect code. A lot of people will hear about, I guess, like a thing that's called the 80-20 rule. People have different ways of kind of saying this, but one way to look at it is like doing 20% of the work to get 80% of the value, kind of thing, right? Like this becomes like a real thing where you don't have all of the time in the world to go make something perfect. Sometimes it's good enough because it will allow you, your team, and the business to get to the next phase. At that phase, yes, if things are continuing the same direction, yeah, maybe you can go back and improve that thing a little bit more. But what's very common is that in the real world, things change, right? You might pivot as a business. Your team might have a new priority that comes up. And if you would have kept taking the extra 80% of that time to go get the last 20% of that value, you may not have afforded yourself this opportunity as a team to be able to pivot to the other thing, right? So I bring this up because I think if you haven't had experience in the industry, a lot of people aren't used to this. It feels uncomfortable to be like, I didn't get all the time to make this perfect. Or if you have to rework something or scrap something, people are like, I just wasted time. But things change, right? If you can learn from those experiences, maybe you created a prototype of something and it has to be scrapped. Maybe the feature that you added was a stepping stone so that you could onboard customers, get some feedback, and now go on to the next phase, right? All these things they're real scenarios. And I think keeping that in mind, that it's not just about kind of sitting around trying to draw up the perfect algorithm all the time, will be helpful to keep in mind. One final thing I kind of want to touch on, I'll keep this video hopefully pretty short, is that you're going to be collaborating with people now, right? In most places, you'll be working on a team on projects with other people. Maybe in the beginning, the bug fixes and the small features you're doing, they might not feel like there's a ton of overlap with all your teammates and stuff. And of course, this can look different in other places, but you are going to be working as part of a team most likely. And working on a team means that you're going to be dealing with different personalities, right? So this is just another like thing to layer into software engineering, right? It's not just trying to design an algorithm that solves a very particular problem. It's now designing the algorithm that fixes the problem or meets has a solution to a different problem. It's adding in the constraints of the business. So maybe it's time, maybe it's different other things going on in the business that impact your design. And now it's also working with other people to make sure that what you're creating will integrate with the team vision. It is up to the standards that the people on the team have, the design philosophy. You're going to be getting feedback from those people. Like all of these other types of interactions get mixed in. And I think if you're not prepared for that kind of thing, if you're not thinking about it, it might be a bit of a surprise. It might not feel comfortable. And you're probably not setting yourself up for success if you're not trying to factor in ways that you can optimize collaboration, right? So I want to kind of throw that out there. It's not just about how do I become a better, coder per se, like how can I just practice literally coding better and better. I think part of being a software engineer is working on teams effectively with other people. So try to keep that in mind as you're starting your journey, because I think if you prioritize some of that early on and make it, part of your focus, you'll be set up for success. Okay, so in summary, all 3 videos, right, from start to where we're at now. First video, we were really diving into how you go through your application process and what you want to focus on there, right? So startups versus maybe bigger companies, maybe different ways you get identified. Trying to think about your application from the perspective of the hiring company, right? So that's part of it. Then you're going through interviews now that your application's worked, and some of the things that you might have to encounter there and how they vary from big tech to startups, different types of questions that might get focused on. Those were some generalizations I gave before. And then you get the job. Awesome. So congrats. And now that you're at the job, like what should you be focusing on, right? So I kind of brought up that you might have some smaller things that you're contributing to, like bug fixes, small features. You're going to want to prioritize learning and asking questions, asking genuine questions, not to criticize and just, like stir the pot, I guess. And then the last part I was trying to bring up is that around some of these other more real constraints from the business and the fact that you're going to be collaborating with people. So hopefully this helped a little bit. It's a little bit of insight into kind of how you can take some steps to break into software engineering and how to start making progress once you've done that. And again, if you like this video, thank you so much. If you can, like it on YouTube and then subscribe to the channel if the content is valuable to you, and I would really appreciate that. So thanks and take care.